All right, and we're back. I asked and I have received a phone call. So we're going to take Taylor, who is on line one. For all of you that typically watch OpenLine, you know I'm a new host. Taylor, can you hear us?
I can hear you, and thanks for taking my call, and thanks for the program.
You got it, Taylor. Yeah, what are you calling to talk to Dr. Tom Schwartz about from Vanderbilt University?
Well, I wanted to first say I think he's exactly right on what he had to say about inflation and that portion, but Ukraine was the subject I really wanted to start out with.
Great.
As we know, one of the main subjects that fuels Russia's economy is natural gas and oil, which is known as Europe's service station, and that all started mainly out of Germany. And my point is this: Germany is one of the most biggest government in Europe. But I saw a chart on C-SPAN the other morning, and it showed just what I thought. And it was about the aid going to help out in the war. The United States is supplying probably 80% of what is going on, going in to the forces over there. Mm-hmm. With Germany talking big, they gave almost nothing before the war. Then they promised they would up their ante and do all these great things. But I read several European newspapers, and the fact is Germany has dragged their feet and given virtually nothing, as has France more so than some others, and England, of course, probably second to the United States. But countries like Italy and a lot of these NATO countries are providing virtually nothing. And I think probably Germany thought, why put anything in there, because they're going to lose the war anyway. But anyway, even at this point, they haven't. But the main thing is, we have heard nothing out of the American press about this part of what's going on over there.
Yeah, Taylor,
I've never heard Germany and their aid even mentioned, other than at the start when they promised things and they did nothing. Yeah. And of course, we drug our feet too long and still aren't providing the biggest guns that they need. But that's my point, and just wanted to hear what the professor had to say. Thank you very much.
Yeah, thank you for calling, Taylor. So, he actually read my mind in the break. I was wondering your opinion on how other countries have handled and have helped, and are they doing a sufficient job? Taylor wants to know a little bit about that, too.
Well, it's very interesting. Germany did, of course, initially promise a great deal. Actually, and this is, in a way, Germany had essentially neutered its defense industries and armaments and the rest, that it really didn't have a lot of weaponry and other equipment to provide. The Germans now have said that they're going to spend the requisite 2% on defense that they were always resistant to. And this is one of those things that's, ironically enough, Donald Trump was right about. I mean, he pushed Germany very hard on this, and that not to be as dependent on Russia. And turns out he was right on this, and the Germans were wrong. But Taylor's right that in a way the United States has ended up supplying a great deal of the weaponry hardware that the Ukrainians need. That's partly because we have the best stuff.
Powerhouse.
We are the powerhouse. We're the arsenal. I think really what should be the case is that when the war is over, or at least it ends in some manner, the Europeans should assume the primary responsibility for aid to rebuild Ukraine. And this is where I think the United States can legitimately say, look, we provided the Marshall Plan after World War II. This is your opportunity to help Ukraine rebuild, and that this should be the priority. Is
that a proximity thing, or why do you believe it should be on the Europeans?
Oh, I think I think what Taylor's getting at is that in terms that the burden of the defense has been in the war the U.S. has done, but then I think in the post-war period the Europeans should step up, particularly and provide the type of economic aid that they're very good at and that they have more of and could do. I think, and the proximity, of course, comes into play here. But I do think this is one of the issues where the United States and Europe are somewhat divided on exactly, although they've managed to maintain, what's fascinating, they've managed to maintain a pretty strong sense of unity against Russia on this. But there have been cracks. The Europeans, I think, would like a settlement. They wouldn't mind, they would be probably far more willing to accept Ukraine losing a good deal of its territory and simply getting a settlement than the Ukrainians are, or that we right now are. And so what Taylor puts his finger on, though, is this relative burden of the war, and I think he's right to say that the United States has taken on the military aspect, and this is something ultimately will have to be also done by the Europeans.
Okay, so is the end in sight? I'm not positive on the answer for that.
Well, there's not really. It's not at all. The fighting seems to be going on. There doesn't seem to be a let-up. What has changed is it seems that Putin's objectives are far more limited than they were initially, so he might achieve them, namely taking the eastern provinces that he wants, the two areas that he's already claimed are separate, and then the land bridge to Crimea that he's created by conquering Mariupol. But the problem is that really would cripple Ukraine to lose that much territory, so it's really going to be very difficult to get a peace settlement if Putin insists on keeping all the gains from the war that he's achieved.
I mean, it's a no-brainer that Ukraine has the most to possibly lose here, but you said that there could be some sacrifices European countries and the United States would have to possibly make to make this thing wrap up sooner. So what are you talking about?
Well, I mean in terms of the amount that they give and the support they give to Ukraine to continue the fight. In this sense, the Ukrainians are facing this issue very profoundly, that they're running out of hardware and others, and that they need more assistance, that they're going to need continuing assistance in their economy because they're blockaded from exporting their grain. Their economy is scheduled to, or at least is thought to contract by about 80%. They're going to need a great deal of assistance simply to get through the next year. So that's going to be something that's really going to require the Western nations, NATO nations, to step up and provide aid.
I know you said that Americans may be losing a little interest in the war because of what's happening here at home. However, is that the case in Europe? Is the Ukrainian...
Harder to gauge, but because the Europeans, it is closer to them. But it also seems that they're facing inflation. They're facing this is a global issue.
Yeah, true.
So there are ways in which they're also having other issues come up that are affecting them. And Ukraine, the other thing that has happened is the war has stayed limited, which allows European countries to at least not to think it's going to affect them directly as they might have at the beginning of the war.
But they still could be taking in refugee families, or
which is what they are. Many of them are doing, and certainly, a country like Poland that has accepted millions of refugees is going to be burdened by that. Affect that, but those countries are certainly on the front lines and certainly still concerned with what's going on.
As you look back in history, how would you compare the interest level that Americans have had in this war that doesn't involve boots on the ground, that started in our country, to other wars that didn't involve Americans? I know we're in the social media age, so it's a lot easier to pull up things and get updates, but has it surprised you at all about how much, at least initially, Americans invested their time in this war?
I think so. It was gratefully in that sense. I think it happened. What helped is that the war was not complicated at first. It was a clear-cut case of aggression. There were no. Putin didn't try to hide it the way he did in 2014, where he sent in his little green men, guys who were not in Russian uniform, that sort of thing. This was a full-scale invasion that they launched, and I think people here in this country could see in it parallels to other circumstances like World War II, in which the aggressor nation simply attacked. And I think that lent a certain clarity and a certain then unanimity to the response of Americans that would have been lacking had the war been more complicated, either with an insurgency or some other ways that were not as directly clear to people that this was a war of aggression.
We've got about 90 seconds. You said the war may not have a clear end in sight, but what's on the horizon?
On the horizon is the possibility that the Russians will consolidate their control over the eastern territories and force a decision on whether to push further by NATO to give more arms to Ukraine to try and take back some of the territory that they've lost. That's going to be on the horizon, whether we're going to work into a situation where Ukraine is going to be encouraged to continue, and whether they can continue taking the casualties and losses they're taking is really difficult to see.
And the midterm elections, the effect that you think any of this will have on the way we vote, it may not be the #1 issue. Do you think it's in the top 5?
No, I don't. I think the overwhelming issue will be the economy and inflation here. Foreign policy issue will be relatively minor because of the degree of agreement.
All right. Thank you for being a terrific guest.
Thank you.
I understand why you have been here a number of times over the years now. So, Dr. Tom Schwartz, always a pleasure. We're going to take a quick break, and when we come back, we'll let you know what's on tap for the rest of the night on News Channel 5. It's going to be a hot week, so yeah, that's going to be a big talker on News Channel 5 at 10 o'clock. We'll see you in a couple of minutes.